Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to this Carcanet book launch. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm very excited that we are launching another Catullus from Isabel Williams. This is the complete Catullus switch. Thanks for joining us to celebrate. Isabel's here. We're also joined by Sarah Cullen and Herring, who I'm going to introduce in a moment. But my name's Jasmine. I'm from Carcanet, and I'm just going to run over what's going to happen tonight as usual. So I can see that some of you have found the chat box. That's great. Keep your messages coming in. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us what you think of the reading. We love to see your messages coming in as we go through the evening. Later on in the event, there will also be a chance for you to ask questions. So as well as finding the chat box, I would really like you to find another button, please, which says Q&A on it. If you get your questions for Isabel lined up in the Q&A, then Sarah can put them to her later on in the event. So just bear that in mind for a little bit later on. Things are going to be a bit different tonight. Isabel's not going to give us a live reading. I've got a video I'm going to play for you, which is really exciting that she's prepared. And I have had the pleasure of watching already, and I think you're going to love it. So after that, Isabel will be in conversation with Sarah as usual. So that's what's going to happen this evening. Thank you for paying your £2 to be here. We really appreciate that. I'm going to put the link and the code in the chat for you. If you haven't already got this over email, it'll come tomorrow. So don't worry about that now, but we can go over all of that again later. I think that's all the boring stuff that I need to say to you. Okay, the exciting stuff. We're joined by Dr. Sarah Cullen and Herring, who is from Oxford University. She's a senior instructor in Latin and ancient Greek there, and she's also a fellow and tutor in classics at Wadham College. So it is my pleasure to invite her to join me on screen so that we can get going properly with the launch. Thanks, Sarah.
Hello, thank you so much, Jasmine, and thank you particularly to Isabel for inviting me to participate in this event. It's an absolute delight and pleasure to be here. So I first encountered Catullus aged 13 in my Latin class at Belfast Royal Academy, which is a very straight-laced grammar school in Northern Ireland. It was, of course, the Sparrow poems, which we were asked to deal with. And it was quite some time before I encountered the idea that Catullus's sparrow might not be just a sparrow. And probably about 2 years, maybe 3, before we were allowed anywhere near any of the racier content, which if you've looked at Switch already, you will have seen plenty of. We were instructed to produce literal translations of the 2 poems with lists of all the words we had looked up before copying down an agreed version in our ruled exercise books, all very proper. And that was the end of Catullus for us. So translation was, as it remained all the way through my undergraduate and graduate degrees, an exercise in literal rendering, worrying about straying too far from the original, being penalised for not knowing how a certain subjunctive was being used, or committing the worst crime of all, perhaps, using anachronism. I now spend a lot of time with my students thinking about what translation actually is. What is it for? Outside the exam hall, I'm really very wary of the sort of pedantic gatekeeping that objects to recontextualizing ancient poetry in modern terms, or worries about versions being close enough to or too far away from the presumably sacred original. Rather than focusing on anxiety about what is lost when we engage in translation, I much prefer to get people to think about what can be gained, especially when the translation transcends this kind of mere transfer of words from a dictionary definition to another dictionary definition and grapples with the transference of meaning, tone, spirit, mood. Even better when the translation says as much about modern culture as it does about ancient Greece or Rome, as of course Isabel's translations of Catullus very much do. Before I speak a little bit more about Isabel's translations, I did want to say a little bit about the difficulty of the task that she set herself when she set out to create this complete Catullus. Catullus's textual history is as mysterious, shady, and confusing as his sexual history. The manuscript tradition is one of the most unstable and unreliable that we encounter in the ancient tradition. The earliest manuscript we know of popped seemingly out of nowhere in the late 13th century and was then lost again. Luckily, it did leave behind at least 2, maybe 4 copies, which went on to spawn further copies of their own. Anyone who's played the game, which used in my youth at least to be called Chinese Whispers and has now thankfully, if obliquely, been renamed lots of different names, including Broken Telephone. Anyone who's played that game can imagine the mess that this sort of transmission makes of a text. Catullus is full of alternative readings, so places where different words appear in the same place in a given line, and we have to decide, which is valid, or are any of them valid. It's also full of corruptions, which is when the text breaks down completely and maybe the meter's wrong, or it's very obvious that this word can't be right. And we're left again puzzled. What should we do? How do we rebuild the text? Can we get to the original? It's full of confusion. And that's the reason that Catullus appears so frequently on seminar series as a testing ground for students who want to learn this arcane art of textual criticism. How do we kind of critique the Latin and Greek texts that have come down to us? All of this makes a huge headache for the translator, who's standing on shifting ground before they even heave out their Oxford Latin Dictionary and start to decide whether Catullus would have been a top or a bottom. Isabel's versions are sharp, they're witty, they're as neoteric as Catullus's Latin without ever being pretentious or exclusive. I don't think you could find anywhere else an allusion to Shakespeare followed by Doritos, followed by Hello Kitty in a few pages. No one else would think to render Roman numerals to resemble orgasmic moans and text message kisses all at once. The neoteric movement in Latin poetry was characterized by frequent allusions to esoteric literary predecessors, particularly a multi-layered, very complex type of allusion where you might get 4 or 5 literary predecessors and some topical references, maybe some jokes about friends, jokes about the current scene in Rome, all layered together in just kind of 2-3 words. And that's there to test the reader's ear and eye. Can you spot what's going on? Are you clever enough? Are you in the in crowd? Do you know what's happening? And I think, very much the neoterics also had this playfulness and this lightheartedness, this tongue-in-cheek attitude to genre, to style, which pervades Isabel's work, this lightness of touch. Her use of shibari as a framework to unpick the complex sexual and social power dynamics in Catullus, particularly in his interpersonal poetry, is ingenious, as are her frequent modern allusions, which often have had me laughing out loud, including on the bus, so I did get some funny looks for that. Catullus would absolutely ask his friends for sushi. He definitely mocks someone for smelling of lynx, and I'm afraid to say that it is my opinion that he would send dick pics. These translations are scintillating, they vibrate in the mind, and I see new allusions every time I look at them again. So without further ado, I will hand you over to the video that Isabel has made of the poems themselves.
Right, can I start again? Am I on? Okay, I hear the butler says I'm on. Just before we play the video, I've got some things to say. Sarah, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I must look at it and write it down and learn it. It's brilliant, thank you. Now, about the video you're going to see, this is entirely deliberate as a tribute to the very corrupted state of the text that we have inherited. We have deliberately made some accidental differences between the words that you will see on the subtitles and the words you'll actually hear us saying. Of course, we do it deliberately. Just one thing about the poets, the mainstream poets that Catullus's neoterics were responding to, developing from, challenging. If you imagine that the mainstream poets are being represented by some very boring sort of hen party type handcuffs from a high street sex shop or something, very run of the mill. All the neoterics have got is this, ichinawa, one piece of rope. And with this one piece of rope, they have the technique, they are developing the technique to do anything they want just with this. And finally, before we start the video, I must thank my friends who allowed me to bludgeon them into making this video with me. Thanks. Okay. When I saw everything through gauze, you said, I'm yours, and made me king. I loved you, not just as a male grabs his polyester bride, but as a lion loves his pride. Now I see through unstreaked eyes. Your squalid lies turn up the flame. You ask, how come? As if you didn't. Because the talons in the wound make the lover more feverish, less kind. Oh, you'll love this. Bloody hilarious, Cato. Yes, no, really, look at me. Don't go. Too funny. So I take some G, sneak into the dungeon on my own, find a kid pounding some girl. I don't say please, so slap my wrist, it's a stupid rule anyway, and make him the meat in the sandwich. Look, am I boring you or something? I bored him with this skewer, lol. Okay, you can read it another way. It's dark and I'm dead. There was no girl, only mistress's boy slave, beating time to thoughts of her as we do. Oh Christ, look, have some of this. Of course I can handle it.
You bet I'm claiming a tax rebate. Who can look at your shambles of a government without weeping? Only a greedy chancellor with no shame. Mr. Marble Balls himself greases offshore accounts for European subsidies. Now he raids the British. And you, World Ponce, you let it all go by. Waggling his superfluous superego, he bed hops like a randy pigeon under a sex god delusion. And you, world arse, you rubber stamp the lot. You're that shameless, greedy chancellor. Turning to the dildo king, was it for this you shafted the islanders in the west? To let your knackered fuckboy suck up billions? Funny kind of overseas aid. When he reached the end of his shagging grab, he's ripped through the family silver, helped himself into sorted tax havens, tanked economies, trashed Britain. Why do you promote this shit? Was it his game plan, looting pensions? Was it for this your father and son-in-law act for the pillaging classes left us in ruins? I'll send a fair sum. Sue me for the rest.
Poor Ariadne, half-dressed, miserable, watched his ship diminish and battered her wings against the dead ends of her labyrinth. That you loved me still the same, that you loved me, you loved me still the same, that you loved me, you loved me still the same, then. What? With a zip wire, trip wire, bomb bounce, big band, bang, Bacchus, fronting the Electroverx crew scouts and shouts for you, Ariadne. It's love this time with a true all-over blue tattoo, and you... Ecstatic, erratic, torture gardens, hardened exhibits pour on the dance floors, stimulant silly, bite the apple and couple and triple and quadruple. The hand on the bottom, the have you had sex yet? Brandish the fertility spike, cover up the business end with a pine cone. It works for some. Juggle joints of botch-butchered bullock. Bodies bound with seething snakes cluster round the glass inspection case with the naked human inside. Thrust bold tentacles through the holes. Tourists try to glimpse the rituals. Spunked, spanked, scarlet, tooth-vibrating, tinnitus techno. Here's a floor show, the infamous boom boom and skinny redhead. Shinbone, shindig flutes with savage harmonics. Wait. Everything is very small. You wake up, face down, on the counterpane. Each tiny prick, each satin stitch, flame stitch, stem stitch, isolated knot, a deafening echo of embroidery thread dragged by a needle through a hole it made. And you know what this is, don't you? So it has a screw there so you can make it tighter or looser. And yes, I do have an embroidered bed cover, just flowers, not people. And yes, there are holes in it. Now, some people would do an invisible mend for the holes. I just embroider around them in blanket stitch. And this is rather like Catullus's work. Sorry, what a silly allusion to make. I wish I was dead. In that has also come down to us, full of holes.
Varys takes me to meet his new bondage model at the rope jam while I'm idling. A standard issue whore's veneer, but not without some cheeky low appeal. So I use that distancing double negative to pretend I don't fancy her. We chat about my aberration, the attempt at a job, my segment to Tokyo, and whether I got a bonus. I tell them straight, austerity minus for all. Especially when your boss is too busy being filleted under the desk to look out for his team. But surely, they chorus, you took time out at a dojo for advanced tuition. So, needing that girl to admire me, I say, look out for another double negative. I wasn't so busy with work that I couldn't pick up 8 dynamic suspension transitions taught by a master. Although, in fact, there's no dojo on earth where I dare go beyond floor work, in case the harness slips and strangles the bottom. For aerial ties, I practice on myself or chairs. Now she hits me with some trollopy, would-be posh act. Please tie me in all of that at the Seattle Erotic Art Festival next month, darling. It'll give me a competitive edge. Hold on, I tell the hardened little trio. When I say pick up, I mean I watched the sensei teach them to my friend. Yes, he does exist, and his name's Cinna. All right, you call him Gaius. It's the same person. The moves are all in my head. I just need time to work them out. But trust a clueless, bloody parasite like you to ignore the obvious interpretation.
Oh, it's from Catullus. Please, he says. Blah, blah, darling. You're so hot, so talented. He wants my after-lunch slot. A firm booking with no one else looking. He says if I stay in the camera's eye and concentrate, he'll come 9 times. In that weird way of his, you know, he calls it fluctuation, right? Now it's urgent. Have I got a cancellation? He's full of carbs, adopting the position. And here it is. Look away now, the dick pic.
Varus memeus ad suos amores visum duxerat eforociosum, scortillum ut mi tum repente visums, non sanille pidumne quim venustum. Ucut venimus incidere nobis sermonesferi, inquibusquis deesset iam Bitinia, quomo dose aberet, et coniammi profuis etere. Respondit quoterat, nihil nec ipsis, nec pretoribus esse nec corti, curquisquam captunxius referet, presertimquibus esset irrumator pretor, nec faceret pili cortem. Ad certetamen inquit, quod illic natum dicitur esse, comparasti atlecticum in esse. Ego ut puelle unum me facerem beati orem, non, in quam mi tam fuit maligne, ut provincia quod malinci disset, non possoctum in esse parare rectos. Ad mi nullus erat nec hic nec illic, fractum qui veteris pedem grabati, incollosili corrocare posset. Hic illa, ut dequit cinedi iorem, ueso, inquit, mi Catulle, Paulum istos commoda, nam volat serapim deferri, mane in qui puelle, istut quod bono dixeram mea bere, fugit me ratio, meus sodalis cinnes Gaius issibi paravit. Veru trillius an mei quid me, utor tambene quam mi pararim. Set insulsa malet molesta vivis, perquam non licet esse negligentem.
Stress testing, are we, mistress? How many of your tropes in rope can be endured before the poet chokes? Ply me hemp, silk, jute, and tie me. Ichinawa, takatekote, futomomo, ishikarada, tasuki, kannoki, hashira, daroma shibari. All of it. Samanawa for the burn. Count the stars that spy on sly lovers when the night is ball-gagged. That's how many of your tight knots and rope marks will deliver me beyond madness. More than a voyeur's torch could spot, or a jealous sensei take to pieces.
What do you make of that, Gellius? A man who does his mother and his sister, rolling around all night with no clothes on. And his aunt. Off the scale, would you say, Gellius? There's only so much whitewash, and that image I can't exorcise. A self-flating coil. See you around, yourself. Go ahead, the seat's free. You might not recognise Gellius over there. After the massive weight loss. His mother's so accommodating and fit for her age. His sister's hot, his uncle cooperates, and there's a troop of girl cousins. No wonder he's skin and bone, even confining himself to display only goods and nothing legit keeps him all ribs. I thought I'd ordered medium rare. Doesn't this make you think of Gellius and his mother? Oh really? Well, listen, they've got a baby on the way. We're illegal shagging in that filthy cult. They'll spawn an actual Magus, Alistair Crowley kind of thing. Junior will be a souped-up thurifer, jabbering the mumbo-jumbo, flinging fatty offal on the pyre. What am I saying? He won't reach term. They'll barbecue the fetus bits and call it faggots in court.
Huc est mens deducta tua mea lesbia culpa, et quita sofficio perdidit ipsa suo, ut iam nec benevole queatibi, Subtima fias. Nec desistere amar, omnia si facias. This is what we've come to, Claudia. My self-will has been dragged down by the beast in you and drowned in its own pool of meaning well. I couldn't bring myself to like you now, even if you played the convent girl, or give up loving you, no matter how wide you spread your legs to the whole world.
There you go. 116b. Note, there is no 116b. I was all the birds of Callimachus. The crane at the jugular, the unknown predator, the vagrant shearwater, the flick-knife kingfisher, the birds of omen, every forsaken immortal nightingale, the stork with revenge in mind, the crow on the roof that croaks what the hell happens next, the eagle with a word from Zeus, Apollo's swan winging it, the monumental bronze cock, and after me, look out for your 3 ravens sat on a tree, a darkling thrush under the canopy. Don't keep your sparrow waiting in the mead hall. Maybe you'll find it all. Note. See you later, annotator. That's it. It's over now. Oh, we're back.
We're back.
I'm not muted, am I? Okay, someone says no. The voice of the butler says no.
So I have lots of questions while we're just waiting for people's questions to flood in. I'll abuse my position as is traditional, as I think Catullus would definitely approve. My first question is actually about the material object which I am clutching, and about the illustrations. So I'm very much a text person, and I deal in words and in text, and I would love to hear more about your illustrations and whether you feel that they are also a kind of translation of Catullus or a version of Catullus, or are they interacting with the text in another way?
I think the world that I'm illustrating or interpreting in my particular way is the world I stumbled into quite by accident, which was BDSM Narnia. There's some BDSM, there's some difficulty about the S. It's something like bondage, dominance, submission, sadomasochism. So the 2 things for the S there. But this entirely accidental world suddenly unlocked for me, it's a very personal thing, how I mean, like you, grammar school girl, very ordinary, uneventful upbringing from Woking, didn't go abroad till I was 16. How could I engage with this character from ancient Rome? And yet at school, you get a sense that you have sort of unfinished business. And decades later on from school, I just tumbled into this world where I see he would fit straight away. The whole the rules, the technique, the tradition, it's going back to something ancient. You know, he goes back to Sappho and Callimachus, and the Shibari Japanese rope bondage cult goes back to the samurai and earlier. So for me, I was allowed to go and draw just as me. It wasn't a drawing class or anything. What was happening during the performances, which I must say are consensual. No means no. Everything's about acceptance. And it was a very free place where I was just allowed, if I could sort of find the room that was, you know, a bit squashed up on the end of the sofa, and I could just sort of sit there drawing frantically, because it actually goes very fast. That's a surprising thing in the right hands. So you're constantly editing. It's a bit like translating, because don't forget, drawing is autobiographical just as much as translation is autobiographical. You're saying, I'm imposing myself between you and the text or and the scene that I'm seeing. And as I was freeing my drawing line, the thing is, because it goes fast, you have to draw in a free way, and it's to try and get that, improve that discipline in yourself, that I was doing it. It also freed my writing line, and I ended up writing less of the schoolgirl, because like you have to please the examiners. I was taught to show the examiners, you know, what the words mean and how the grammar fits together. I don't want to diss the syllabus. I don't want to diss the way I was taught. I will diss myself actually for being lazy, because it occurs to me now that once I'd done my homework, had I then sat down and done some free translations, I would have been encouraged. And it's only in later life that I realized that. But the drawings for me, which sort of pepper the book, are very much a part of how my thinking about translating Catullus evolved into some kind of giving myself permission to be free, but in a very constrained way, because the whole bondage discipline is about constraint and rules.
That's so interesting. Thank you so much. So I think we'll jump to a question from Michael Schmidt. So Michael says, it's a long question, but I'll read it. Do ask me to repeat if you get any of it again. Do you think the Catullus innocent will get the book, or is it intended for people who have some Catullus or a lot of Catullus, and therefore intended to challenge those experts? It's so great to have a female translator getting so deeply into so many frames of male reference, consensual translation, ... What a great question.
I've kind of forgotten the first half of it already.
So do you think the Catullus innocent would get the book?
Yeah, I hope so. I think there is, once people realize that it's quite safe. It's only poetry. It's only someone expressing himself. And a dear friend of mine who's watching, I said to her, look, I'm going to send you the book. You may or may not be interested. And she said to me, it's really modern. And I said, I'm alive. That's the whole thing. And I think there is a sense that's been bred into people over the years that the classics are boring old stories about gods and goddesses who do ridiculous things. Although that really shouldn't be, because I'm completely immune to video games, but I am aware of how much classical myth is exploited still. And of course, when you go back and read the Iliad, you can see, oh, wait a minute, this is a video game right here, this scene. So what I wasn't expecting actually was for Catullus heads, which is about half the people watching, to take any interest at all, and that really shook me first time around. But I think it is available for everyone if you shake off your fear or resentment of the classics, possibly as a way, A, that you were taught, or B, that you weren't taught, that it was a subject that was kind of separated from you, or separated from your school or from your class. And a lot of people are doing work now. There's working classicists, for example, who are really trying to bring in the culture for everybody. Now, something Michael asked about female and male. I try not to make a difference. If you go to a bondage performance, you'll see lots of shape-shifting going on between male and female, and you increasingly see smaller women tying bigger men to demonstrate two things. One, the whole consensual thing. There's a guy who could flatten this girl, but he's accepting it. But also, I've completely forgotten the next point I was going to make, which is typical of me. But yes, the whole male-female, it's much less of an issue now as to who's trying whom. And I think, again, that was another reason why it was a very useful metaphor, foil, starting point, springboard for me to handle Catullus, who was obviously very fluid, not just because he's ancient Roman.
No, absolutely. I mean, for me as a reader of Catullus, if not an observer of Shibari, that immediately started to speak to the kind of gendered power dynamics in Catullus. And he's not always the bottom, but he is with Lesbia, like she definitely kind of has him under her thumb, and then at other times he's more dominant and more threatening and even threatens sexual violence. And I think that kind of play is really comes forward in the Shibari. Okay, so we've got a question from Madalena Parsons, who says, you say you were inspired by BDSM, which is guided by rules. What rules did you set for yourself while working on the translations?
Just a point about BDSM, I don't know anything about it. All I've done is observe Shibari, which is regarded as a very nerdy, small department within the wider fetish or even BDSM world. I don't even know quite how to apply the term BDSM. The people who do Shibari are regarded in the same way as the people who do Catullus textual criticism may be regarded by a certain fraternity or outside in the wider classics world. That people look on and say, you get off on that. Why don't you just whatever? So rules I set myself. I think in terms of drawing, no rules at all, apart from the huge constraints of space and time and light, because sometimes I might have half a spotlight shining in my face. I've got one famous evening session where I thought I was drawing in black and I turned out to be drawing in navy blue because I just couldn't see my own paper properly. So you're desperately trying to, again, you have to get away from drawing rules because of the urgency of the task ahead. Then you have very well-meaning people coming up and saying, can I see your drawing? And you think, well, actually, no, because, I'm only here once a month. But as far as the rules go of translation, probably thousands of minuscule rules, which I'm not really the best person to comment on because I'm not sure I'm a reliable witness of what I'm doing. I'm thinking about rhythm the whole time. There's a lot of rhythm in Shibari. If they're doing it properly, it goes on, there's a pulse. I've got to drive it on. I'm not too keen on hexameters like Ted Hughes. I want to push and push. And if I can make a line shorter, I will. I used to be chief sub on Reader's Digest, which is all about cutting. And that is very much ingrained. I cannot, shake that kind of discipline off. So yeah, there are rules. Not sure I can quantify them all.
Great, thank you so much. I have a couple more of my own questions, but they're flooding in, so I'll just give a couple more from the Q&A. So Paula says that given the poems are so conversational, that's my own question coming through there, conversational, monologues, internal, external, implied dialogue, so all of these different conversations, how do you try out the voices? Do you do it out loud, on friends, role play?
I speak to this one of these. I've got these sort of dotted around the place, or I just sit here, in isolation during the day, during half the night. You have to say it out loud, and then you give it to someone else to read on the video, and you think, what? And you think, oh no, hang on, yeah, that works too. All right, because I'm not there with a megaphone saying cut or anything. But yes, and listen. And that's one thing that I lost a lot, because of COVID. I used to go everywhere on the bus, listen to what people are saying on the bus.
It's fascinating. I love that idea of kind of picking up the resonances of what the zeitgeist of what people are saying, and then that feeding into your translations.
Yeah.
So we have a very direct question from Lucrezia saying, have you ever considered translating Ovid?
There's just within, I can't make the grand gesture because I'll fall over something or the clutter on the floor. I'm sitting not far from Arthur Golding's Ovid. Who needs another one? There are some excellent modern ones. I just felt, A, I had unfinished business with Catullus, and B, that he'd been a bit sort of barnacled over the years with some people's expectations or a kind of faux sense that he is in some ways obscene or improper. I don't think he is at all. He's not even that erotic. And another thing about bondage, Japanese rape bondage, is even the practitioners aren't necessarily trying to play up any erotic side all the time. It's about many different things. I've just lost track of the question. Sorry, can you remember what it was?
Ovid?
Oh, of it, no. Yeah, because I was worrying about two or three authors ahead. The thing about Catullus is I think he's very much at home in the Shibari world. I've actually got, I mean, one poem here that I actually read out from under my duvet. Hoc est mens deducta tua me lesbia culpa atquit sophicio perdit ipsa sua ut. So you've got a 4-line poem, and you've got these words here, hook, to this extent, ut, so that, and hook and ut are actually holding up the body of the poem as you get 2 hard points, which means hooks in the ceiling, holding up a suspended body. And then I won't go on, but you've got interlocked adjectives going with nouns. They interlock in a way we can't do in English, showing the dependence of the bottom on the top. And you have, for example, soptima fias in symmetry with omnia si facias. They look the same on the page, they sound the same. That is a miniature bondage rope performance right there on the page. I can see Catullus very easily slotting into this world. Horace, absolutely no way. Ovid doesn't need it. He wouldn't be remotely interested in fetish, except possibly as a sort of voyeur. Not really welcome, thank you, on the scene. And you know, there's no one else who spoke to me so much of fetish, of shibari, as Catullus. So Arthur Golding is my answer.
I love that idea of the structural aspect of poetry resonating as well as the themes. I hadn't really considered that. I was thinking much more of the kind of, yeah, the power dynamics, the people dynamics, the sexual dynamics, I guess, that kind of link shibari with Catullus. But I think that's a very powerful metapoetic image of the structure of the poetry itself. Really wonderful. I have a question that's sort of linked to that, which is actually came into my head when you showed us your embroidery with the holes in it. And it made me think of Derrida and his idea that kind of deconstructionism was actually about filling in the gaps in things. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot with classical reception, and kind of how a lot of reception texts are, you know, creeping into the gaps and cracks in classical texts and kind of prizing them open in ways that they haven't been before. And I just wondered, what are the gaps that you're filling in Catullus, do you think?
It was very useful going to the Catullus textual criticism class over a couple of terms at Oxford, because that's all about gaps and lack and what do you chuck in. And I think that made me just generally more relaxed about giving alternative versions of what's happening. And for example, one poem, number 56, where we're not quite sure what Catullus saw. We think we know what he did. Did he see a boy on his own, a boy with a girl? Was the boy actually Lesbia's brother, who has a very complicated sex life, possibly with Lesbia as well? And so, yeah, I was able to sort of dabble more. And yes, it's one of these things that frees you up. People say being tied in rope makes you feel free. It makes you feel powerful. That's not a sensation I've shared, but you know, I accept it when people tell me that's how they feel. The power is with the bottom, the power is with the person being tied.
In a way, I think Catullus, or at least for me, was tied and kind of bound and hidden by the way it was presented to us. So there was a lot of sort of obfuscation, looking up words to find that they were translated into Italian in the Latin dictionary or into Greek, or, you know, whole lines missing, or in an edition of Catullus finding that certain poems, you know, the numbers didn't add up because there'd just be a poem missing. And I think that's something that kind of, when I discovered the full Catullus, it was quite a surprise, having had a very sanitized version for a long time. Okay, we've got some more questions coming in. So Susan has asked, was Catullus simply a 20-something intelligent and privileged chap, just too clever by half?
He was actually working under the extreme burden of being a great poet. I think it was a terribly heavy burden, actually, when you consider that how much he actually writes about poetry itself. And we were talking about taboos earlier, Sarah, you and I, and for him, the big taboo is bad poetry. That's the one thing he can't forgive. You know, he can be very sort of snarly and petulant and aggressive and unpleasant and rude and victim, posing the victim to do with this sort of sexual affairs and so on. But the issue of poetry, he always takes dead seriously. And that's an occasion, I think, as a translator, you really have to rise to and not trivialize, because it is the constant thread that runs through.
Do you think we have a sense of what he thought bad poetry was? What made a bad poem?
That's an extremely interesting question, which I don't think I have a sort of prepared answer, but obviously he wants truth. He wants integrity, because in spite of all, I think he has enormous integrity. He has great respect for the craft and the art. And he's very happy, I'm sure, to get into discussions. And well, he does, he names names, people who thinks aren't up to it. And he reserves so much love and affection and longing for people he regards as being perhaps on his level. But I think he also knew he was writing for posterity. I think he was in no doubt. And perhaps he had a sense of greatness, although I'm sort of troubled by 64, the long poem, which may or may not have been his bid for posterity, which is very different from other things that he wrote. It has a sense of something high flown going on. Was this really his big attempt? He probably didn't finish it. I don't know. I don't have the scholarly equipment to discuss that. But we must remember the last poem that we have, whether it's probably not the last poem he wrote, the last poem that we have, although it could be addressed to the Gellius, who is one of his love rivals, we don't know if it's that particular Gellius. It's ultimately about poetry and not about sexual jealousy.
Okay, so Jennifer has a burning question, which is sort of linked to a question that I might have asked about technique and your technique in translating, but I'll read you Jennifer's question because I think Catullus would have absolutely loved the way she's phrased it. If no one else is as ignorant as me and I am the Catullus virgin, how much would Catullus have loved that? I am the Catullus virgin. I am going to ask I'm going to ask the obvious question. Let me hang myself with my own rope here. What does a free translation mean? How free is free? Are we talking fan fiction?
We're not talking fan fiction, because I'm not making up. I chuck in comments from time to time, a bit of commentary, just to maybe give my view of what's going on, or to put it into modern is such a dangerous word. Of course, when you modernize something, you're also digging a grave at the same time, because in X years' time, what you are writing is going to be incomprehensible. And I did put in something about Bitcoin, and I thought, no, I better put this in the past tense already, because I really don't know how long that is going to last. Freedom, I think I desperately need the framework of heavens above, this, which is the standard currently. People are talking about replacing it, but the standard Catullus text in Latin. I've had to have the cover discreetly mended there. You have to, even if you're not translating a word literally, you have to carry across the feeling, the sense, the emotion that you think was there at the time. Now, obviously, as I said before, it's autobiographical. You dig up things in yourself and your experience and your friends' selves and your friends' experiences to bring into it. So things that you witness at a shibari scene or whatever, you can add. But I'm not happy. But for me, I'm not the sort of person who would, about the idea of really sort of taking off and losing the skeleton. I think you have to carry the skeleton with you. And there's this bit at the end, actually, of Rudyard Kipling's story, The Man Who Would Be King, where the old soldier has, they've been through terrible things together. And the old soldier says, and I never let go Danny's hand, and I never let go Danny's head. And he's got Danny's head in a bag. And I think that is my relationship with whoever I'm translating. I'm hanging onto their hand and I'm hanging onto their head in a bag, because they've been dead rather a long time, but I'm not going to let that go.
And do you consult other translations as well as the Latin, or are you not interested in other
No,
translations?
I do. I have to make sure I'm not going completely insane. So once I've gone through the notes in Quinn, which are in about, the notes in Quinn are addressed at somebody at my level. I will check with James Mickey or Guy Lee or somebody, whoever, you know, happens to be within reach, just to make sure that I'm not just losing my marbles, because I'm not a scholar. My university degree is in English with a little bit of Latin, and I haven't been examined on Latin for a very long time.
I think publishing a translation of Catullus is a de facto examination in Latin, certainly true.
Yeah, but I don't have to please examiners. I kind of have to please myself, which is a very different thing. But I'm conscious of not letting down, trying not to let down Miss Ferguson and Miss Hill at school, who taught me Latin and Greek. And I have to, you know, I carry around, you know, I hold their hand, I carry, well, you know, not necessarily their head, but who am I trying to please? Pass. I don't know. So,
Jennifer has a follow-up question, which
Jennifer.
we were sort of discussing earlier when we discussed Logue's translation of Homer. Are there purists who are going to be absolutely furious?
I get some of it. Now, do you know this very famous Ring Lights in the Way? This very famous series of children's books. So that's not my hedgehog. Its ears are too fluffy. I get that. That's not my Catullus. It's too rude. I still get people saying I've gone too far sexually. And I think, have you not read the original? But I really must sit down and write, that's not my Catullus, based on all the things that people have said to me. But I would say just have a look at the original. But people do form their opinions about Catullus very early on, because he is dangerously attractive to a miserable teenager. You think this person is just like me. He isn't at all. And it takes you maybe a long time to realize that. But maybe you can dangerously early form an affinity which really isn't there. Now, C.H. System does lovely work on Catullus, but he calls him my friend across 20 centuries. Catullus is not your friend. And if you like to sort of slop into some lovely, warm, cozy, oh, let's meet down the pub relationship with whoever you're translating, that's the route to hell. You've got to have a distance. This person is basically dead on a mortuary slab. You're the one with the sharp tools and a bucket. And you've got to work out what to cut out and chuck in the bucket.
I think that's a pretty good answer to those grey bearded purists who may or may not be hissing at you from the sidelines. I've got a question from Ronnie. Why do you think Catullus has such wide appeal?
He has a directness and he suffers and he's not afraid to express it. And he has, well, obviously as a neoteric poet, he's binning the sort of the monster epic culture. That's been done. It can't be exceeded. Okay, you're waiting for Virgil to come along and sort of glorify it in another way with a massive sort of political code, you know, going on at the same time. But I think because he's funny also, he's got brilliant comic timing, and he's conversational. He's always addressing people, but you're more intent on Catullus himself than the person he's addressing. And also he gives himself away so much in what he says. Now, one of the poems I did, number 32, when he's trying to get a slot with a prostitute called Ipsitilla, it's one of the very few times when I've used somebody else's voice. I've actually used Ipsitilla's voice herself. But normally I feel you don't need to do that to sort of dramatize what's going on, because Catullus, he's doing it himself out of his own mouth. You just turn up the dial maybe a tiny bit. And increasingly, when people say to me, what's your favorite bit from Catullus? I'm seeing it more and more as a long extended opera or a dramatic monologue coming out of one mouth. He's coloring it all.
My very favorite, I think, although it's hard to choose, is actually your translation, your version of 64. And one of the reasons for that is that I felt that you gave Ariadne more of a voice. I don't know whether did you feel that she spoke to you as a character, or you felt that there was more to be said from her perspective?
No, I don't think the thing I can't forget about Ariadne is that she disappears. You know, she has no narrative necessity or validity, according to various authors. As soon as she gets spotted and offered a happy ending by Bacchus, who sort of whisks her off from being sort of miserable and wretched and deserted on her island, she is about to disappear. She is a vehicle. She's fallen in love with this, again, this hopeless character who's got to go off and do something much more important, on, you know, get a boat and go away, as so many of them seem to do. So yes, and also she's someone who I think is there are a number of people. I mean, I do use the idea of being in therapy. You know, my Catullus is in therapy, and in fact, one of the few people I give a voice, as well as the membership secretary of a club in Mayfair, is his therapist. I allow her to speak in one of the poems because she's getting bored out of her skull. He's going on about Gellius yet again. But no, Ariadne is a vehicle and a foil, but goodness, she does have feelings. And she's also part of this very strange cinematic structure, the flashback, which kind of worried me a lot, because I thought if I started in a linear way, I started translating at the beginning and went through to the end, I wasn't necessarily going to pick up all the energies and synergies and cross patterns in the flashback. So I actually started working on it when Bacchus actually arrives. And that sort of, and then I worked through to the end, then I worked through in stages back to the beginning. And that was the only way I could deal with the flashback. Also, the arrival of Bacchus is the only part of 64 that I can identify with personally, because it's about the first time I went clubbing in my 50s, and it was the Torture Garden Christmas event fetish club in a deconsecrated church in Brixton, which was actually setting the bar for clubbing either very high or very low, depending on your point of observation. And I went to see what was going on and to see what people were wearing, and it was quite extraordinary. And what I'm describing in The Arrival of Bacchus is that whole wave of first impressions, such as a human being in a glass case, in a glass inspection cabinet, being inspected, and just total freedom, and the noises that were going on. And you have this sort of raucous sonorous bombos, the sort of terribly raucous, bombastic noises going on. And there is a character called the infamous Boom Boom, to go with bombos, who is a Torture Garden host in Los Angeles. So of course I'm going to bring him in to sort of represent all that. But that's a point of freedom for which I started. And then, you know, you labour, God, 64. I ended up calling 64 the long bastard, because it is long. I need to try and keep up the momentum, keep it going, keep the whole pace going.
I think that's a fantastic description on which to end. Lots of nice messages coming through from people. Maureen saying fabulous presentation, looking forward to reading with you later this month.
Yes, Maureen.
Fred, love it, great launch. And Ronnie saying this was great, Isabel. So anyone got any last questions before we finish up? Okay, there's a link there in the chat in case anyone hasn't seen it, to purchase a copy of the book with a discount. So do make sure you click that link if you want that.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure this evening. Congratulations, Isabel. I really, really enjoyed this event. I hope you guys have enjoyed yourselves as much as I have. And I hope you have already bought a copy of the book. If you haven't, please do that. I've put it in the chat for you. So yeah, you've got the discount code there. It'll come as an email tomorrow as well. So if you don't want to do that right now, don't worry. And as ever, if you have any problems accessing the website or getting hold of a copy of the book, please just get in touch with us and let us know. And we'll do whatever we can to help you. So the last thing for me to say is please join us again next time. On the 20th of September, we're launching a new collection by Martina Evans. I'm putting that in the chat for you as well. You can go to our website and see our events page, sign up for our newsletter and stuff so you don't miss any of this. But that's it, really. So thank you guys, well done again to you, and thank you, Sarah, for hosting. Yeah, thank you guys for all your messages.
Thank you very much indeed, everybody, especially Sarah. Thank you.